Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 527. A good yontif, being that we're coming from Hei Teves, which we'll of course speak about. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altois Oleh HaShalom, and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana Altois, Yukasil ben Leah Rochel and Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todes ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altois. As I said, we're coming from Hei Teves, which is a Yom Tov that the Rebbe established after the victory, the Didan Notzach in Tovshim Mem Zayin 38 years ago, court case regarding the Sfarim, the books in the library of Agudas Chassidus Chabad, and the victory was that Agudas Chassidus Chabad was granted full authority and rights over this library, Frierdiker Rebbe Sfarim, and that it's not the private inheritance of any of the Frierdiker Rebbe's family members. So the obvious and most important question is, what exactly is this holiday, this Yom Tov, so to speak? Why do we commemorate it? And what do we commemorate and celebrate on this day? As one person wrote, said, we understand, okay, that Barry Gerari, and the grandson of the Frierdiker Rebbe, stole books from the library, started selling them with the claim that he's an heir. He's a grandson, son of one of the daughters of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Agudas Chassidus Chabad, led of course by the Rebbe himself, said no, this is not a private inheritance. This belongs to Agudas Chassidus Chabad, which is the body of Chassidim. It's a library, and you can't just take it and sell it. You can't take it, period. Definitely not sell it. So fine, it was a very aggravating period. The Rebbe himself referred to the aggravation, and we saw it. And the victory was done. So finished. An aggravating period ended, and we move on. And yet, the Rebbe was kevei established, as he writes in the footnote that we find in the Sichos and Memorim connected to Hei Teves, that on this day in the federal court was established that the library belongs to Agudas Chassidus Chabad. The nations of the world recognize that. What is the significance of that? As I said, when it comes to Beis Kislev, we know that even though ostensibly it was a Mesirah, they informed on the Alter Rebbe, but we know in Ruchnius there was something deeper going on. It was a challenge in heaven on the very idea of the Alter Rebbe spreading Chassidus as he was doing Chassidus Chabad. And his release and liberation on Beis Kislev was a vindication that in heaven they said, yes, not only you're allowed, but you should do it even more so, as the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid told the Alter Rebbe. But what's the spiritual significance of Hei Teves that this becomes a yearly, now it's 38 years. Wouldn't it have been better if the whole thing never happened in the first place? So let's just talk about my Hei Teves, like we say about my Chanukah. And the answer lies when you really look at the court case and you look at the Judge Sifton, who passed the judgment, who gave the final ruling. You see the key elements of the case. And that is, what is the relationship between Chassidim, the Rebbe, and the Rebbe's Sfarim, the Rebbe's belongings? So Sifton writes, there was a time when this was not up in question because there was a trust, talking from the Alter Rebbe's times all the way till the Frierdiker Rebbe. But the Frierdiker Rebbe in his foresight realized, coming to America, this needs to be established. What is the legal relationship? And that's what this standing before this court, Sifton writes, to determine that. On one hand, the plaintiff is arguing, meaning Agudas Chassidus Chabad, that it's not a private library. It was paid for by Chassidim, who gave money to the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe. He brought Sfarim. And he's the caretaker, he's the overseer, but it's not his Sfarim. On the other hand, the defendant says, no, the Frierdiker Rebbe is also a private citizen, and he owns books as he owns other property. And as such, that can be passed on to heirs. Interestingly, Sifton rejects both arguments. Because the first argument basically is saying it doesn't belong to the Rebbe. So you rejected, that's not correct, because once the Chassidim gave it to the Rebbe, it's not like you can come and say, you're just an administrator or caretaker, God forbid. A Rebbe is a Rebbe. And they trusted him implicitly. And if he wants, he could take the Sfarim and give it to whoever he likes. So he's not just their caretaker and overseer, watching it for them. On the other hand, he's not just a simple private citizen either. So Sifton therefore quotes the Rebbetzin, Chaimushka, the famous line that she said in her deposition at the end, when she was asked, who did the Sfarim belong to? Your father, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, or the Chassidim? She said, my father himself belonged to Chassidim. Which in a way is the note that the Rebbe wrote to the lawyers. We talked about that. Called the inyan of a Rebbe is bitla yesh. He's not a mitzvah of his own. The Rebbe wrote it regarding their argument that's not shy that the Rebbe would write something. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter saying it's a good Chabad library, and they were arguing. He just wrote that to get the books, but it's not necessarily accurate. Chaz v'shalom. But furthermore, it actually describes what we're talking about here. So it ends up being that this psak, this in the secular court, by a non-Jewish judge, this established something that you would think is a Chassidish hergish, a Ruchnisdika concept, that the bitl of Chassidim to the Rebbe and the Rebbe's relationship with Chassidim. No, it's a legal statement that the Rebbe is not a private citizen. He belongs to Chassidim, and all the Sfarim belong to Chassidim. In other words, the Rebbe is not an individual. He is a tzibur. Or in the Lashon of Rashi from the Medrash, Anosi hu HaKoel, HaKoel hu Anosi. And this is critical to emphasize. So it's not about who's the heir. The Rebbe was also an heir technically. He's the husband of the Rebbe Tzin Chaim Mushka, who's the daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe. That's not the argument. Who's the heir? The argument, what is the whole muhus, the whole personality of this library? It's all part of a Rebbe and a Rebbe, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu's children coming and saying, after Moshe Rabbeinu's passing, hey, our father brought you the Torah. Now you want Torah, you have to come through us. You need to pay us royalties. Torah tzivilon Moshe Merosh Kilis Yaakov. It's Yerusha for the whole Jewish people. Moshe was the shliach that Hashem chose. But it's not a private thing. Not even of a Moshe Rabbeinu. It's the rechush of the tzibur, in this case Chassidei Chabad, which also assures the nitzchias of it, the eternity of it. Because if it's an individual, the individual can pass it on to his heirs, and then who knows, and they sell it. No, here it's not shaykh to that, because it's essentially part of a Rebbe, and a Rebbe's nitzchias, and mazari b'chaim, afu b'chaim. So the Sfarim, hypothetically, are not possible to be given out or distributed or sold because it belongs to this body as long as they're Chassidim. But Hu B'chaim, Zari B'chaim, Hu B'chaim is the nitzchis of this library. As the Rebbe explains in the Sikha Vayikra Tov Shemam Zayin, which is worthwhile learning and reading, about even the rechushim, the very physical table and chair, and of course books, is all part of the Rebbe's nitzchis, Kedusha Le'zozim Im Kema. Kedusha that never changes, that never leaves, that never gets altered. So Hei Teves established something. For Rachmana litzlan, Hei Teves had not established that. This would be up in question. What's taka the story? But here, in a way preempting even the challenges that we would have after Gimel Tammuz, established in a court of law, in the secular court of law, and the Nefesh Habamis could understand it, that a Rebbe is a nitzchi. Because he's not an individual. He is the body of Chassidim, and the Chassidim are him. Nosi hu HaKoel, HaKoel hu Anosi. And that is the Yom Tov, that establishing that. So taka like Beis Kislev, the Alter Rebbe writes in his famous letter to Rabbi Levi Badishever, that's a day where the Einei Kol Hasorim, the ministers, and the government officials, non-Jews recognized the miracles of this day. The Rebbe asked, why is it significant that they recognized? It's an Yissachar for Chassidus that the Eibishter Shemayim said that you could teach Chassidus Chabad. Because the whole purpose of Chassidus is to transform the world. Torah to transform the world. La'aseh shalom ba'elam. And bring Moshiach and geulah. So when the world recognizes that, that's a big thing. Same thing here with Hei Teves. But here's even more so, because here it's about the Rebbe, his nitzchias, his connection, that lives on. So that, in short, is the power of this day, why we commemorate and celebrate. So how do you celebrate it? By learning in the Sfarim, by buying Sfarim, by living by them. Then you show it's b'chayim. It lives on. It's not just it's a celebration. Okay, we won the good Chidi Chabad won the case, and the Sfarim belong. It means the Sfarim are alive. Chayenu ve'erech yameinu, and we live by it. So it brings us to the next question regarding Hei Teves. Why was Hei Teves such a big celebration? And that we answered. And what should we do on its anniversary to tap into its joyous energy? So the Rebbe says specifically, he actually printed then the Rechamuna, one of the Sfarim that was taken, to buy Sfarim, to learn Sfarim, and to strengthen our work, because one of the arguments was, as we'll soon talk about, that Chabad, in a sense, ended in 1950. The Rebbe referred to that in some of his talks very sharply. They want to create another Chmon al-Islam Levaya. And Chabad is not active. By all means, to show that we have to be active. Meaning more active than ever before. Even though Chabad, of course, was active. But as we'll soon discuss as well, because the Tzaddik Keneged, the other side, argued they're not active, the Rebbe said we have to learn from that to become even more active. And more active means in the learning of Torah, in the spreading of Torah, and of the Sfarim. Another person asked, we are told the physical trial of the Alter Rebbe. What was the spiritual trial and victory connected to this day? We are told the physical trial of the Alter Rebbe and Mount Mittler Rebbe in the Russian courts mirrored a spiritual trial in the heavenly court, where the Rebbeim were accused of teaching too much Chassidus, or bringing it down to everybody to be more accurate in the Chabad Eifen, in a way that everyone could understand it. Do we know, or has the Rebbe ever said what the spiritual counterpart of the trial of the stolen books and the victory on Hei Teves represented? So as I just said, yes, the Rebbe spoke about it, and it's also clearly implicit in so many different places, that the spiritual trial and victory was not just whether an individual did an act that he should not have done, which was to steal books and then sell them, was the question of what is the relationship with the Rebbe and his Sfarim and the relationship with the Chassidim. So it established that nitzchias. So Hei Teves, you could say, is the celebration of the nitzchias of a Rebbe, the nitzchias of all his rechushim, all his property and all his books, and that nitzchias, eternal connection with the Chassidim. That never stops. So hypothetically, if he could take 100 books or 50 books, he could also take all the books. So essentially the entire library is private property that he inherited. No, Hei Teves stopped, that's not the case. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe was Moshe Nefesh, he wouldn't leave Russia, the former Soviet Union, without his books, as the Rebbe brought. And they said, it's a sakana, leave. It was right after Yud Beis Tammuz, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was in danger. They wanted Frierdiker Rebbe out of the country. He wouldn't leave without the Sfarim, because the Sfarim are not just books. It's the very essence of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, shtiklach, it's a piece of the Rebbe. And not nafshik sovis yehovis, when the Rebbe writes a manuscript. And the same thing is with all the books that the Rebbe learns in, the nefesh of the Rebbe is there. Like the Rebbe Rashab said before his istalkus, Ich gehe in Himmel, the ksovim lo zechaych. I go to heaven, the ksovim, the manuscripts I leave for you. So the Rebbe explains what's the juxtaposition? Because in the manuscripts you have me as I am in heaven, because I've inscribed myself, engraved myself in these writings. So in a broader sense, that's what the books are, the Sfarim. So if it belongs into an individual, and then the individual inherits it, and then they can sell it, so the books are essentially not connected to anything nitzchis. It can be sold from one collector to another, who knows what happens. But here, no, it's part of the whole process, and the Alter Rebbe wanted to leave Russia, wanted to have these Sfarim. It's part of who he is, the very essence of who he is. So that was the spiritual challenge, so to speak, and then, of course, the vindication and the victory is the victory of this nitzchis, and that's what we celebrate. Why were the stolen books considered a challenge to the Rebbe's leadership? I think I answered it already, but let's just read how someone wrote it. Why was Hei Teves considered a challenge to the Rebbe's leadership when on Yud Shvat 5:7:11, actually 5:7:10, you could say, the Rebbe said a maimer and cited the first 6 Rabbeim in order to clearly state he's accepting the leadership of the 7th generation, and the community accepted him that day. So it was already clear 35 years earlier that he is the leader. That's correct. But there could always be a kitrug, there could always be a challenge to it. And there was indeed a challenge. The people know the history back then in 1950, 51. The Rebbe said clearly that the leader has to have access to and control over the library, because the library is part of what the Rebbe is all about. And there was resistance then, but then it was not spoken about much. And it went undercover, but it was never resolved. And then in Tov Mem Zayin, it was finally resolved. So it's not whether the Chassidim accepted the Rebbe. Obviously, there was no challenge in that area. Chassidim, of course, completely accepted the Rebbe. But the Sfarim represented a significant aspect of what a Rebbe is all about, and what the nitzchis of Chassidim is all about. Like the Rebbe said, the Rebbe Alein belongs to the Chassidim, so for sure the Sfarim. And if they don't belong to the Chassidim, then the question is, the whole connection seems to be compromised. Okay. Why did the Rebbe take such offense to the statement by the adversary that Chabad is not active? Was a significant issue surrounding the events of the stolen books and their recovery on Hei Teves that the other side made an accusation that Chabad is not very active. And the Rebbe took great offense at this accusation. And the Rebbe said the accusation is not true, but since we have been accused, it's a sign that we now have to go out of our way to increase our activities. Because that was the whole essence of the whole thing. If Chas v'Shalom Rachmana Litzlan, I don't want to even bring it up, but everything had stopped in 1950 after the Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe on Yud Shvat, and there was no Hemshech, then what this Svarim belonged to whom? You could say the heirs are the family, and the family divides it and sells it, or makes money on it, or whatever they do with it, even if they keep it. So by saying that Chabad is not active, you're basically saying it didn't continue, so there's nothing that continued. That challenges the whole very nitzchis of the Frierdiker Rebbe's work, which of course was what the Rebbe committed to perpetuate. He didn't commit to do his own thing. He's committing to be the 7th generation, the 7th Rebbe, to continue the Frierdiker Rebbe's work, which continued the Rebbeim before, the work of the Rebbeim before. So it's not just taking offense personally, it's challenging the very essence of what Chabad is all about. That Chabad came to an end, Chas v'Shalom. Again, the nitzchias of it all, the eternity of it all. And that's why the Rebbe said, that's in Sheker Gomer, the Chabad lebt mer, es lemer lebendig, and mer aktiv. But because there was a challenge, we have to demonstrate that we'll increase. Like it always is, whenever there's a helam of concealment, you always have to increase to demonstrate that even the taina is completely bottle and mavutal, because we increase and we double and triple our efforts and activities. Okay, moving on. How does the Hei Teves express a deeper victory than the miraculous victory of Chanukah? So there was reference to that as well. So obviously Chanukah is Medivrei Sofrim. Not going to compare it in the context of Hei Teves. Hei Teves came later. Just like each thing has its own milas. But yet there's a mila in Hei Teves because Chanukah demonstrated in general also nitzchis, that no darkness can vanquish. So even when after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no more menorah, but the Chaneres Halolu of Chanukah continues to burn. So there is a commonality. But here, of course, was about the Rebbe and Chassidim. Just like you'd ask the question, what did Beis Kislev add to Chanukah or to Purim? So the spreading of Chassidus Chabad. So everything has its mile. Now, it's important to qualify. I'm not going to go sit down now. A skeptic will say, well, you're equating Hei Teves with Chanukah. Like some people said, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, Nocha Rosh Hashanah. It's already 4 Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah says. So you have to understand, we're not coming to establish a new mitzvah, Divrei Sofrim. No one says that. But there's a concept of chfivin alai divrei sofrim, or even minig Yisrael. There's a certain chfivus. And Hei Teves brought out an aspect which is vital, especially today, to know until Moshiach comes, we have a nitzchis of Chassidus Chabad, and has not ceased, and it continues to grow and continues to be more active. So that's the emphasis in that context. What did the Rebbe mean when that the stolen books were like live bombs that could explode at any time? Was this like the Hezbollah beepers? Okay, I wouldn't exactly compare it to that, but let's put it this way. It's very clear why. Because the Sfarim are not just Sfarim, they're not just books. They're very essence of a Rebbe. So if the books are in the wrong place, they're dangerous. The books belong by the Rebbe, by the Chassidim, and the Rebbe belongs by the Chassidim. So it's like a Rebbe would be in prison. The books are in prison, Pidyon Shvuim, like you need Pidyon Shvuim, they're like hostages. They need to be redeemed. So as long as they're not, they're dangerous because they're in the wrong place, in the wrong hands. So it wasn't a threat, it was just a mitzias. You're talking about books that belong by Chassidim. They don't belong by individuals. They shouldn't be traded and sold, etc., in the market. So this also will answer another question that people ask: why was the Rebbe so upset on Beis Kislev when the books came back, the Sfarim came back, about the people hanging out in the streets? So someone writes it in more detail. Dear Rabbi, I just saw the video of Beis Kislev where the Rebbe shouts on the Bochum to go back and to learn. It's very frightening. I don't understand how the Bochum are supposed to know that it's not right to do after it was done multiple times before and the Rebbe didn't say anything, meaning to be in the streets and just dancing and singing. Also, so many times we see by dollars and in letters from the Rebbe such hard and harsh statements and comments. It really makes me think, how would I ever know what is right in the Rebbe's eyes now? I know that we don't ask questions on the Rebbe, but I also know the Rebbe loved and cared about the Bochum, the students, and people, and even the small child, even more than I love my children. So I'm not asking how the Rebbe is able to do it. I'm just asking how is a chassid able to have strength and not get insulted, v'chulu. Okay, so it's a little. Let me just rephrase the question. So first of all, it's true. You didn't see the Rebbe do this. The Bochum were hanging around the streets many times. And here something touched the Rebbe in a way that didn't touch in other times. Why? Now you could say it always bothers the Rebbe when a person's not learning Torah and just hanging out in the streets like the Rebbe said and counting the birds and wasting time. Bittul Torah. But here it touched a chord because the whole Hei Teves, that's what the Rebbe was saying in those words. They're hard to listen to. But the Rebbe said, you're making a joke out of the whole Hei Teves. The whole Hei Teves is to demonstrate the nitzchis of the Rebbe and the Chassidim through Torah, through learning, through Sfarim. And that's how you said, I ask you, that's how you honor it, the Dan Notzach of the Sfarim, by doing the opposite, by not sitting with Sfarim and learning, standing in the street and just singing. And drein sich in the Gasm for hours, the Rebbe said, on end. It's like the exact opposite. Now the truth is, anytime it's opposite. A person should be learning Torah all the time. But Hei Teves, that exactly is the whole Yissachar. That's the whole point. The whole point that it should bring more activity and be more alive and live with the Sfarim even more than ever. So the Rebbe, this was such a contradiction, means that people weren't even getting the whole essence of what we're honoring here. That's at least what in my mind to understand what happened there. But again, this is not in any way suggesting that you could waste time other times. The Rebbe was a person who wanted everyone to be learning Torah and doing mitzvahs all the time. But again, there's times where it's very blatant. How blatant this was, like really contradicting the very essence of what Hei Teves represents. Why were criminal charges of theft not filed against the accused? Someone else writes that. In a regular library, if someone returns a book late, they have to pay a late fee penalty. How much more so if someone purposely steals a book? They need to sit in jail because they did a crime. So the most obvious reason, because this was not a case against an individual who stole books. This was more about the very essence of the library and who it belongs to. It wasn't interested in getting a person behind bars because he stole books. It's about setting the record straight of what the library belongs to and whom it belongs to. That's why that was not pursued. That wasn't the goal. This wasn't a personal thing. This wasn't about to punish someone. This is about establishing the facts. Long after all these events happened, today we know, in a federal court of law, the idea of eternity of a Rebbe and his Svarim and his Chassidim is established once and for all. And the details don't even really matter, how it came about. Just like we don't know all the details exactly. I mean, we know the details, but it's not the key thing. Beis Kislev, we celebrate Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. We don't celebrate that a certain individual who mastered on the Alter Rebbe was proven wrong. That's not the key. That's how it played itself out at the time. The key is the bigger message that comes out of the whole story. And while we're already on the topic of non-kosher, let's do one more question on that. And that is, someone asked this question. If God infused his soul, non-nafshis, ksovis yehovis, in the Torah, why is the Torah finite? To read the exact question, if Anochi is non-nafshis ksovis yehovis, means that Hashem put his essences into the Torah, and we understand Hashem's essence is infinite, then why is the Torah finite? It has 5 books, has a beginning and an end. If the Torah was infinite, we would never be able to finish reading it. So 2 points. First of all, that's the whole point. That the Eibishter gave us his full infinity, his whole etzem, in a finite structure that we can relate to. That's part of it. So it retains that infinity, but it comes to us, yes, in Svarim and in details, in Taryag mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs, and there's a certain amount of words in the Torah, 304,805 letters in the Torah. Yeshishim ribu esis, 600,000 when you count the esis ha-machshava, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, Bahar. Second point is Torah is also infinite. Aruchem eretz midah rechava min hayam. The Torah itself, the letters have limits, but the Torah is infinite because it has Hashem's infinity and the Reisav Kutshibrichu Kulachad. So it's really a combination of Bli Gvul and Gvul, and even beyond both, which only captures even more what we were talking before, that the Sfarim are not just Sfarim. I say for Torah is a Dover Shebekdusha, more than just a Dover Shebekdusha. It's Ritzeini v'chachmos shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's God's will and wisdom, which is Hu v'chachmoseh, Hu v'ritzeineh, Hu v'chachmoseh echad. He's one with them, which only emphasizes even more the significance of the Svarim and the Hei Teves. Okay, so we covered Hei Teves, but there are more events this week. Maybe the word "but" is not really the right word. In addition, there are other things as well. So let's talk about a few other items, including later in the week. On Friday is Asara B'Teves. And it's unique because this year it comes out on a Friday, which is not so common. We'll talk about that. So what lessons does this day offer us? So the Rebbe, Asara B'Teves, generally was the time he didn't speak. But in Tavshin Lamed Ches, after the Rebbe had the heart attack, to talk about increasing after a concealment. So after the setback of the heart attack, the Rebbe began speaking Sichos, Mitzvah Shabbos, but he also started a minhag of Divrei Kfushin. On fast days, he began to speak on a fast day. And one of the times that year was Asara B'Teves, both in the evening and by day, and he actually said Maimorim as well, from his room. They were all edited, mugeh by the Rebbe, and printed today in Likutei Sichos Chelik Chof. in the Esophagus, you have all these sichos and the Maimorim. So the Rebbe, one of the things he spoke about Asar B'Teves then, was it says in Avud Raham, it's a Sefer of Halacha, customs, that Asar B'Teves is unique because it says Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh Asar B'Teves. Now, where else does it say that? By Yom Kippur. So based on that, the Balei Halacha established that if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you learn Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh from Yom Kippur, just like Yom Kippur is Doicha Shabbos, Yom Kippur you fast on Shabbos. Not Tisha B'Av, no other fast day. Because it says Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh, also on Asar B'Teves, you would also fast on Shabbos. And that's one of the reasons they established Hillel, that Asar B'Teves should never be on a Shabbos. But when it comes on a Friday, we all know, Tainus Esther or other things on Friday, you either push it off till Sunday or on Thursday the day before. But because Asar B'Teves has this power. So the question is why? Asar B'Teves doesn't seem to be the most harsh Tisha B'Av you could understand. Besides the fact that it's a 24-hour or a little more fast day that begins the night before, Asar B'Teves doesn't begin the night before. Tisha B'Av was the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Asar B'Teves was only the Motzar. They encircled and besieged the walls of Jerusalem. They didn't even breach the walls till 17th of Tammuz. So why does this have this intensity that's even more powerful than Shabbos? And the answer that Rebbe gives is because, I'll use my own simple example, when, God forbid, an infection strikes a person, God forbid, you don't wait till it's a full-blown infection that is threatening the entire body. The problem begins the moment the infection, you have to nip it in the bud. Asar B'Teves was not the destruction of the temple, but it was the opening. Once Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the entire Yerushalayim, unless the Yidden had done Shuvah, it was just a matter of time. And what is the idea of surrounding the walls? The walls is a siyus siyog l'teira. If someone could challenge and say, here's a mitzvah, and someone, God forbid, is not doing a mitzvah, or is over, transgresses a negative. But siyog, so the Chachamim add siyog l'teira to keep people away from any threat to their mitzvahs. They added siyogim. They added they built matzah bika gadol geder. It's like building a gate around your house. So if there's an enemy that comes and there's any threat, there's a gate first. They have to go through the gate. They can't just get to the house. The wall around Yerushalayim was not the Beis Hamikdash, but it protected. It was the honor of the Beis Hamikdash. So the attack of Nebuchadnezzar was on the siyog l'teira, on the gate around, the protective walls. And that is the beginning of the problems. Because if you start compromising that, that's a matter of time. Once the walls fall, then there's no defense anymore. So Asar B'Teves represents that first breach. Not the actual breach of the wall, the breach against siyog l'teira, the walls, by Sarah besieging it. Samach Melech Bavel, as the Rebbe brings there. That's why Asar B'Teves has this power, that even if it was a Shabbos, it would be Deicha Shabbos, and on Friday, we take a fast on Friday. So the first lesson, what we learn from this is the importance of the siyogim, not just the mitzvahs themselves, but all the hidurim and all the things the chachamim and their wisdom and understood, you add to protect us, especially when times are challenging. You have to increase in the protection. Just like you have an insurance policy, so to speak. Or like I said, if you have something valuable, you don't just leave it exposed. You build a wall around it, you build 2 walls around it, you build 3 walls around it. That's what Asar B'Teves teaches us. What is the significance of the fast day being on Friday? So we just answered that question. That shows you the power of this day. That even if it's Friday and it's going into Shabbos, and usually Misad Kovet Shabbos, you don't want to fast right into Shabbos. And here you do. Because to emphasize the importance of such a day, because it's the beginning. You don't wait till the Beis Hamikdash burns down, Rahman al-Islam. You wait when you act immediately as soon as you see a little threat. What does it teach us about fighting our battles in Israel today? Very straightforward. And when you're dealing with enemies, let's go to Siman Shin Chav Tes. The halacha mamash says this, that if you have a sworn enemy, and they come to you and they want iske kash v'tevel, all they want to talk about is commerce, trade, kash v'tevel, hay, wheat, or whatever it is they want to trade. So it seems like an innocent discussion. They're not coming, they're not attacking you, but they're your sworn enemy. So if you're living on the border, where there's a threat, even on Shabbos, you have to mobilize and prepare for war, because you have a sworn enemy. So in other words, you don't wait till they attack. You don't wait till the building is burning, God forbid, or is being attacked. When you're around enemies, you have to be very vigilant. And Pekuach Nefesh dictates, even Suffolk Pekuach Nefesh, even a doubt, that you have to act. Which means, never let your guard down when you're dealing with enemies. If it's not an enemy, and they've proven themselves to be real allies, it's one thing. Even then you have to be careful, but it's a different story. So Hei Teves Mamash is teaching us a lesson for today. How Israel has to be on the offense and aggressive, and it's the only thing that responds to enemies. It's the only thing enemies will respond to, I should say. Again, you don't wait till they attack your inner sanctum. Even when you see them, even though they exist, the mere fact they're around your walls is already a bad time. And you have to be very careful. And look what happened when the guard was let down. And of course, the opposite, when you put your guard up and you're strong, that's how you eliminate your challenges. Okay. Let's now move from there to Parshas Vayechi. So this week is also Parshas Vayechi, which is the last parsha in the Sefer Bereshis. Shabbos Chazak. So let's talk about that. What is the central theme of this Torah chapter? Okay. So the central theme is, we're talking now the last chapter of Yaakov's life, and also the Shvatim for that matter. So after the great famine, and after Yosef reveals himself to his brothers in Parsha Vayigash, finally Yaakov, Shivim Nefesh, and 70 souls come down to Mitzrayim, live in Eretz Goshen, Meitav Haaretz, the best part of the land. And it's good times. First time that Yaakov has peace. Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shva'as Rishona, 17 years. The last 17 years of his life went from 130 to 147 when he passes away. And as the Balaturim says, 17 is Gematria Toiv. These were the best years. Tzemach Tzedek asked the Alter Rebbe once why, and he explained why. We'll soon talk about that. But then begins, of course, the continuation that Yaakov is ready, preparing himself for his Aliyas HaNeshama. It doesn't say Misa, Yaakov Lemes, and he calls Yosef in and makes him promise that he'll bury him in Eretz Yisrael, in Marsa Machpelah, and Chevron. Then he blesses Menashe and Ephraim, Yosef's children, and then he blesses all the Shvatim. And that's the central theme, Yaakov's passing, and ultimately the Shvatim, and the end of the Parsha, that finally Yosef passes away, and he remains in Mitzrayim, because he swears to Shvatim that they should take him, when they leave Egypt, they should take his atzomis, his bones with them. Okay. So there are many lessons that we can learn from this central theme. What personal and global lessons does it offer us? So I'll just mention quickly a few. Firstly, how do you define life? Just like Chaya Sarah talks about Sarah's passing, but you call the chapter the life of Sarah. Vayechi is the Yaakov's passing, and yet we call it the life of Yaakov, because you see the real effect of someone after they pass. After they're physically not there, then you see the true Bazari b'chaim, Afu b'chaim. You see the children alive, you know that he's really alive. That's why Vayechi, even though Yaakov's life was documented already in Parsha, starting already told us, Vayetze, Vayishlach, Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash. But the ultimate Vayechi is what we see, which is perhaps also why his best years, because even though he was in Mitzrayim, as the Alter Rebbe told the Tzemach Tzedek. Well, we'll answer that question next. Let me just continue with the lessons. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is the idea of the blessing of the children, both Menashe and Ephraim and all the Shvatim. The Yaakov left them with plenty of keiches. that were empowered. And finally, that Yaakov himself is buried in Eretz Yisrael, but Yosef remains in Mitzrayim as one of the reasons is to give them the Eden when they would to finally get into the Golus Mitzrayim in next week's Parsha, and they knew the promise and they knew Yosef was with them. So the Rebbe compares it, Vayechi Tovshin Mem Zayin. He compares it to Yosef Shebederenu, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that he's also here in Chutz La'aretz, not in Eretz Yisrael, to give Eden strength to know that he's with us while we're in Golus, and will leave with us when we go back to the geulah, like Yosef made them promise. So that we have, in other words, everything we need, even in the darkest times, the blessings, and also the very presence of Yosef. Now, why not Yaakov? Why did Yaakov insist on being in Eretz Yisrael? So we'll address that shortly in the coming questions. So why did Yaakov live his best years in Egypt? An obvious question. The Tzemach Tzedek asked this question to the Alter Rebbe, his grandfather. And the answer is because Dafke Mitzrayim. When you're living in Eretz Yisrael, it's a Makom of Gedusha. Mitzrayim is Erves HaOretz. That even there, you maintain your integrity. That shows a powerful, powerful demonstration of the power of Torah, the power of Hashem, the power of the tzaddikim, starting with Yaakov and his sons. That even in Mitzrayim, Yisur Ne'er Min HaCheshach, you see the power. Dafka in a dark place, you see the power of the Eir HaGedusha. And that was indeed the whole purpose. In a way, it prepared the ground that they would end up in Golus Mitzrayim. And even though it was a dark Golus, but Acher Ken Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol, then they would leave with great treasure. Because the whole purpose of Yerida, Tzedech Aliyah, the reason the Neshama comes down below is the same thing. Coming to a very dark world, Cheshach Kafel Mechupel. But that's the purpose. And that achieves something that you can never achieve in the higher worlds. So it's Dafka in the darkest place, that's where you achieve the greatest heights. Okay, but that's as long as you're in Golus Mitzrayim. So now comes the question the other way around. So why was he so adamant to be buried in Eretz Yisrael? If that's the best, because the goal is not to remain in Golus. The goal is not to remain in Mitzrayim. The goal is to elevate Mitzrayim and then go back to Eretz Yisrael. And ultimately in the geulah amitis v'ashlema. And especially Yaakov himself was from Eretz Yisrael. He was a neshama of Atzilus. Mitzrayim is already in B'riyah, especially Asiyah Gashmis and Chumrius, which explains why Yaakov went back to Eretz Yisrael and Yosef did not. Because Yosef, Chassidus explains, Yaakov is like extension of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Chesed, Gvura Teferes of Atzilus. So he's in Moshe Machpel together with his father and grandfather. Yosef's Inyan is Yesod of Atzilus, which is Mamshech into Malchus, Mamshech into Biyah. That's why Yosef was a viceroy of Egypt. He draws the Kedusha of Atzilus, of Yaakov, this Yaakov Yosef, into the lowest worlds. And that's why he remains with the Yidden there. Because that's his job, is to, even in Golus, to maintain that connection. So Yaakov went to do whatever he had to do, but then returned. Yosef remains until they leave, and that's when they take Yosef with them. That's in brief the explanation. Okay. Next question. So we talk right in the beginning of when he finally gathers his sons together. It says he wanted to Bikush Yaakov legalus esaketz. He wanted to reveal to them when Moshiach would come, but the Eibishter then istalka Shechina from him, and he was unable to do so. So the question is, why did Yaakov initially want to reveal to his family when Moshiach would come, and then why did God prevent him from disclosing it? So the Rebbe has a very powerful sikha where he talks about it. And he asks a bigger question. But Peil, we see the geulah didn't come till this day. That means over 3,500 years from time of Yaakov. Is that what he wanted to reveal to them? then over 3,500 years is going to come till Moshiach comes, that would inspire them. That would make things a lot difficult. So the Rebbe answers, beautiful answer. Ilu Zachinu, had we merited, the geulah would have come right then, right after Geulas Mitzrayim. But because of the Chet HaEgel and other factors, it didn't happen. From Yaakov's point of view, he was going to make like that it's about to happen, and therefore strengthen your hope and betachin because you're about to come out of Golos. So why did the Eibishter not let him say that? Not because the Eibishter knew that it's not going to work out. Because at the end of the day, there's two aspects to geulah. There's the geulah that the Eibishter sends, but we have to do our part. Our avodah. And it has to be done in a way where we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. In a conscious fashion. So the Eibishter did not let him reveal it. Let the Yidden work with a full betachin and hope Mashiach is going to come. But on the other hand, because Bikush Yaakov, and he's a tzaddik geulah Kosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, you have to say that Yaakov's request that the catch should be given over to us subconsciously, superconsciously, it's there in our consciousness. Not that we know an exact date, but that type of absolute immediacy and urgency is there. But then it requires our avodah. And the real avodah is when you don't know exactly when Mashiach comes. When you know, then you're working toward that. You're working, it's coming from your effort. The Rebbe elaborates a lot on this. This was back in Tovshin Mem Aleph, Mem Gimel, that he spoke about it. Okay. Another question was asked about the Shvatim. Why does Yaakov bless some of the 12 tribes with non-kosher animal representations? The lion of Yehuda, the viper of Dan, the jackass of Yissachar, Chamir, and the wolf, Binyamin Zev Yitraf of Binyamin. So first of all, remember all creatures are created by God. The Sikha that the Rebbe spoke in Tovshim Amdal, Chof Cheshvan, that children shouldn't be given toys that of animals that are not pure. It talks there about, what about the fact that you see a lion, let's say, on a pareches in Aron Kodesh, or you go to a zoo, and the Torah talks about these animals. So besides the fact that the Aryeh, talk about the lion, is rooted in Pnei Aryeh of the Merkava, but only Lamata it comes out as a behemoth, as a Chai Tameya, the Alter Rebbe explains, because the higher something is, the lower it falls. But besides that, the goal is to transform these animals. And that's why you find the example also that David HaMelech is compared to a worm. And the Rebbe explains Re'ei Tovshin Mem Zayin. Because the point is to transform even the negative by using it as a moshel for something positive. So Yaakov used these animals as symbols because remember, we're in Mitzrayim and it's to give them the power in Mitzrayim to transform. So in some instances, behemoths, not tameis. Now we're not talking about, God forbid, eating these animals. That's treif entirely. Shalosh klipsat meis in that sense. But it doesn't mean you can't learn from them. You say Giber Kari, strong like a lion. And the others through, besides Tzvi, there's you have the Namar, Nesher, an eagle, Kalka Nesher, Rotzka Tzvi. But the other three are behemoths and not kosher. Because, as I said, firstly, they come from a higher level, so they come down that way, but it's also to transform them into positive forces. As Chassidus explains, that even if something may be osir ba'achila, does not mean it's osir ba'ano. You're not allowed to eat it, but you could use it for different benefits, and you can learn from it. For example, a horse is not kosher, but you can ride on a horse and use it to do a mitzvah, go faster to accomplish a mitzvah. And one more question, which was an interesting question, so I'm throwing it in, about Dan. So we know Dan was the one that traveled in the Midbar later. Dan would travel last. Because Dom was ma'asav l'chol ha'machnas is the expression. He would gather all the aved, everything that was lost. Like people traveled, things fall. So Don gathered it all together. So someone's asking, who gathered the lost objects that the tribe of Dan dropped? If the tribe of Dan walked in the back so they could pick up objects accidentally lost by the other tribes, then who picked up the lost objects that the tribe of Dan dropped? So I never thought of the question. I don't think I've seen it. It's an interesting question. Because the lesson, of course, with Dan is that we all have to have a time that we have to pick up what others fall, what others lose. Which means when you see something, someone is, let's say in your class, someone's a little weaker, you help them out. Or you see someone lost something, you do something to save them or to help them. Or actually to return objects that they may have lost. Which is essentially a big part of what shlichus is. You go out, even Yidden who may not have had a Jewish education, or they may have lost something intentionally or not intentionally, so you're there, walking in the back of the camp, so to speak, to pick up the pieces. But what about if you yourself lose something? So in Ruchnis, you could answer that the Eibishter protects you. Because you're helping others, the Eibishter will make sure that whatever you lose will be returned to you. But Begashmis, I have to look up in commentaries to see if there's an answer to that. But if anybody comes up with something, please pass on. Again, Baruchnis, it makes sense. It's like when you pray for somebody else, Hashem answers you first. Since Dan is protecting and preserving the lost items from others, so Hashem protects them. But in Gashmis, that needs to be still looked into. Okay. There's one more thing I wanted to bring from Parshas Miketz. Someone asked, even though we're already in Parshas Vayechi, but since it's timely, I thought it may be worth bringing it up. And that is it significant that Parshas Miketz, which alludes to the final geulah, because Ketz Sam Lacheshach, Miketz means the end, similar to the Ketz we're talking about, that the Parsha consists of, has exactly 2,025 words, like the year 2025. And the person is suggesting a hint that Moshiach will come in the secular year 2025, which means right now. So I've heard people talk about it. It's an interesting remez. Perhaps. I'm not an authority to say for sure, but I thought it's worthwhile mentioning here for the record. Anything that can help strengthen our emunah, and that it can come. Whether it's hinting to the year 2025 in the secular calendar, you could argue about that. But like the Rebbe Rashab said, he didn't like people who said Pshat Lach Tanya. But if it adds in Yerushalayim, Machnishtes, he didn't mind. So if it adds in Ayurveda, why not? Okay. Another question, we'll do a little follow-up to events that happened in the last few weeks. So we know the president, Jimmy Carter, was a president during the late 70s, passed away at age 100. So someone asked a question like this. What are we to make of the fact that Jimmy Carter, the first president to light a public menorah, passed away on Chanukah? Is that justified? That Hashem pays him back that way? Well, first of all, Hashem's mysterious ways, we all know we don't fully understand. Secondly, a man that lived 100 years, I would not say he was exactly not honored. Maybe that's why he lived 100 years. Because he had the schus to light the public menorah there in the White House the first time. It wasn't the first public lighting, by the way. It's the first one in the White House, I believe. Secondly, I'm not here to talk about Jimmy Carter per se, but since you asked the question, that's how I would approach it. So maybe it's Hashgacha Pratis, the day that he honored Chanukah honored him, his passing. Now, obviously, a passing is a sad thing, but it also has an element, especially 100 years old. A passing is a day where, in a sense, Chanukah will always be remembered as the day that he himself honored. That's how I would respond to that. More follow-up. So last week's program, we spoke about why don't we light Chanukah candles according to Beis Shammai? Someone suggested, why don't we light, like some places you see, you do both. One menorah should be covered to fulfill Beis Hillel's opinion that we add increase, and one should be lit like Beis Shammai. So someone wrote the following, and I'll read the response. Perhaps the reason we don't light according to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is that in his reasoning itself of Parei HaChag, the Beis Shammai's reasoning is that we go like Parei HaChag, which were the bulls that were brought Sukkos, and they went Peiches V'Helech. Started with 13 on the first day, then 12, and all the way to 70, total 70. So once we already have, which is clearly already satisfied during Sukkot, and it would be redundant to do it again, especially since one complements the other, as we know that the end of the high holidays is Chanukah. That's his suggestion. Perhaps complementing the Pnimius and Chitzenius aspects of conquering the L'um Hazeh, one being through diminishing Chayis, and the other being through adding light Kedusha, as well as in Likutei Torah Miketz talks about the 8 Nesichei Adam brought in Gemara Sukkos, the Ushpizin of Chanukah, Noat Seifim B'Tchilasa. Okay, he's basically explaining what it says in Torah and also the Eira Torah. Tzemach Tzedek discuss the Beis Shammai's opinion that's talking about that Sukkot is coming, Chanukah, like Sukkot is coming to be Mavar Umis Ha'elam. Hillel, Behillel Neder, from the word Behillel Neder, is his focus on Chanukah is bringing light, Mailim B'Kedesh. In other words, more light in Kedusha. And Shammai is about the bitter of the Umis. So he's suggesting that we already did on Sukkot, so we don't have to do it on Chanukah. And they complement each other. As he says, they're diminishing the L'um Hazeh, that's why you go and diminish. When you're in Kedusha, you're always growing. But diminishing, once you weaken the other side, you don't have to do it with so much strength. You can go down from 13 paras, 13 bulls to 12 to 11 and so on. And Likutei Torah Taka talks about 8 Nesichei Adam, which is the 8, and there's the 7 Re'im, the seven shepherds, and that's also Makif and Pnimi, as he explains. The shepherds is Pnimi, the 8 is Makif, and as he explains there, the connection to this whole topic. Okay, thank you for that. So let's talk a few personal questions that came in. How should I deal with people who are not dressed modestly without being rude? So it's not necessarily related to any of what we discussed till now, but I'll read the question and then I'll respond. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for your podcast. I'm reading this a little more abbreviated for many different reasons. I've been listening since 2016 and has been a source of inspiration and guidance. As a Lubavitcher who works in the secular world and davens at a Chabad house shul on Shabbos, I've been struggling with how to navigate situations involving modesty. Particularly people who wear clothing that can be provocative. For example, on Simchas Torah, someone in our community asked if I was upset with her. She explained that when she walked in the previous night, I looked the other way. So I replied, I didn't notice her. The truth is, I was trying to avoid looking at her because how she was dressed. Today in shul, a family we're close with, who have been often guests at our Shabbos table, came. I wanted to speak with them during the Kiddush, as they rarely attend shul, but I found it hard to focus, to the way they were dressed. At work, I once had a meeting with a client wearing an extremely non-modest garment. She noticed that I avoided looking at her and even tried to cover up during the meeting. These situations make me wonder, is it good that I naturally avoid looking, or is something I should handle differently? I know that when you speak with someone, it's generally respectful to look at them. At the same time, I understand that most of these people don't mean to dress provocatively. The style of dress seems very accepted in the secular world. We live in a Chabad house community, and a sister shliach, who is my cousin in our shul, I'm often referred to as rabbi, and my wife is deeply involved with the mikveh. She has brought many women to the mikveh for the first time. This past Gimel Tammuz, when we were seriously considering moving, my wife received a very clear answer from the Rebbe through a video on the oil, encouraging us to stay in our current city. Thank you for addressing my question. May you continue to teach and inspire Yidden across the 4 corners of the world through this podcast and all your other online classes. Okay. So this is a question that I've received many times, and similar questions. The fact is, we do live in a world, it's not just with modesty, there's other things. You walk in the street anywhere, especially in the summer, but in general, people don't necessarily dress to the same standards. That's in tznius, but there's other things as well. So the Rebbe once told someone by dollars who said to the Rebbe, he does miftzayim, but sometimes he has a negative thought, a machshava zara. So the Rebbe said, focus more on your futza ma'nesecha and less on chutza. Not that he shouldn't go. In other words, don't let yourself be wandered away. You know that you're doing a mitzvah, go for the mitzvah miftzayim and focus on the gedusha part. So I think this is a case-by-case discussion. To avoid this completely, especially if someone comes to your table, Shabbos table, what are you going to tell them? And to avoid looking at them. So you have to, this is a hard Aveda, you have to look at their eyes and stick to that, look at their neshama, and focus on that as much as possible. It's inevitable in this world, even if someone's not coming, you're walking down the street and you see something that's provocative, sometimes it's hard to avoid. So this is where we are avoid Adam called iskafia, shmiras einayim, protecting what you look at, even shmiras einayim, someone speaks things that are lashon hara, and you're in that vicinity, it's at your table. So you have to find a wise way how to either deflect or change the topic. Okay, so that's different, obviously. But the bottom line is we can't completely avoid it because it's going to happen. So you have to find ways. The best defense is offense. People came by dollars by the Rebbe. Not everybody was dressed the same way. Of course, the Rebbe is a Rebbe. But we have to also learn to look at the neshama and focus on the higher levels of a person and talk to them about higher things. Now, whether you should talk to them about tznius or not is another question, not really in this scope. But that's the general approach. And I don't know if there's a perfect solution. It's an approach that we have to take. Okay. Let me conclude, being that we are concluding, as I said, Chazak Vayechi, so the Sikh Vayechi Mem Zayin, where the Rebbe talks about that Yosef was with us in Golus as well, to give us the strength. So being that we're now at the end of Parshas Vayechi, we're coming from Chanukah, before that Beis Kislev, and we're still not, the geulah has not been here, we should know that we have all the strength we need. And Hei Teves' message is that the Rebbe is with us. The Rebbe never leaves. The nitzchis of the Rebbe is with us. His Torah is with us. His soul is embedded in that Torah. So we have to hold strong, forge ahead, do our shlichus and avodah, and may from this Hei Teves, may we get the strength, and finally we're zeicha to be reunited with the Rebbe and all the Rabbeim, the geulah amitis v'ashlema. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Again, a good yontif from Hei Teves, and may we march into the geulah amitis v'ashlema before Yissachar b'Teves, Yehofchi yom meil l'sason l'simcha v'lemoedim tevim. Be well.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.